way, one of the reasons that public education has been targeted by bad faith political actors ever since. Privatized education? There's a reason for it. There's a reason for that. There's a reason schools are put on the chopping blocks. This is a great cartoon from the period. This is 1868, right? This is the election of Ulysses S. Grant. One of the things that I wanted to point out in the presidential election of 1868 is that, again, we're thinking about Reconstruction. Is it about justice or is it about unity? Grant's election slogan is "Let us have peace." The Democratic opponent, Horace Greeley, his slogan is, "This is a white man's country, let white men rule." This is not something that historians later go back to and say, wow, there was a lot of racism going on here. Oh no. Reconstruction was a main element of contention politically at both the local level in the South and the national level. So what we have here is Grant in the background. This is a symbol of what's going on in the South. Grant in the background. My friend, I think you had better use all means to get back on shore, even if it's a black man that saves you. Black people are saving the South from itself. The African American holding on to the tree of liberty, right? Give me your hand, master. Now that I've got a good hold of this tree, I can help you out of your trouble. You go to thunder. Do you think I'll let an infernal N-word take your hand? No, sir. This is a white man's government. I would rather drown and die than let you save me. One of the things that I want y'all to understand is that because of this exercised right to vote, and I mean, if we want to talk about the dishonest truth, one of the dishonest truths here is that, well, black people were ill prepared to exercise the vote. That's a lie. Part of our dishonest truth is that black people have never really wanted to vote. That too is a lie. That's part of the dishonest truth we're using history to confront. Right? And another one of the lies that's going to be perpetuated by the lost cause, that's a different lecture for a different day, is that all of these black people voting and holding office means that corruption is going to follow. That somehow Reconstruction fails because African Americans were ill prepared to play these roles. No. Reconstruction did not fail, it was overthrown. And it was overthrown by extreme violence. This is where we get white vigilante groups like the Knights of the White Camellia, the Red Shirts, the Night Riders, most infamously, the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan formed, organized, and achieved a degree of unity throughout the region because they wanted to use terror, violence, murder, rape, community-enforced terror to prevent black people from voting and to punish those who were getting involved in activities, in political activities. The reason that the Ku Klux Klan achieves the notoriety as it does, like I said, it's not the only group that targeted black people who dared exercise the rights the federal government gave them, okay? But they achieved a national unity. You got Nathan Bedford Forrest, who becomes the first quote-unquote Grand Dragon. He unites the Klan. Former Civil War general, slave owner, all around terrible person that in the Civil Rights era we're going to name high schools and roads after. They rode at night. They rode in costume. They were supposed to represent the ghosts of dead Confederate soldiers. This is nothing more than a guerrilla campaign that white Southerners continued to wage after the Civil War ended. That's what it was. It was a guerrilla war. Their objective, as you see in the middle, is death, it's terror, it's harassment. The Klan forms to terrorize and kill black people because of their political activities. Period. Have some of the stats there. In Jackson County, Florida, the Klan is responsible for 150 murders that we know of. The Klan is responsible for at least 35 elected officials being murdered during Reconstruction. I mentioned the riots in Colfax, Louisiana, and Hampton, South Carolina, 1873, 1876. These were all a result of contested elections in which black people vote, Republican win, and the Democrats say we're not accepting the results. You literally have massacres that occur over contested elections. In Colfax, at least 100 people died. In Hampton, South Carolina, at least 25. And these are just two of the most noteworthy examples of Klan-enforced political violence leading to widespread massacres. And the rest of the nation knew that this was going on. The election of 1876 demonstrates, as I put in the line, that Reconstruction did not fail as much as it's overthrown by white supremacy. This is a national election. And you can see Samuel Tilden is the Democratic candidate. One of the cartoons says Tilden or blood. So in other words, in the South, you're going to vote for Tilden, or there's going to be violence. Or you have situations like in the bottom left in the South, where it says he's voting Democrat today, where you literally have threatened violence that's used to influence the outcome of elections. As I put in the notes, in Mississippi, the Democratic Party basically said it's open season on black people unless you have a loyalty certificate on election day showing that you're going to vote for the Democrats. In that same state, every voter had to tell the Democratic Party, everybody that voted, where do you live and where do you work? There are 3 majority black counties in Mississippi. 3 majority black counties in Mississippi in which there were only 16 votes cast for Republican candidates. 3 black majority counties in which a total of 16 votes were for Republicans. This is election fraud on the highest level. And what eventually happens is that in 4 states, there are contested results. South Carolina, Louisiana. You can't have a straight-up election without inviting Florida to the party, right? And then Oregon, for a variety of reasons. But in South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, there literally were 2 governors. The Democrats claimed victory. The Republicans said, no, there's a lot of fraud here. There's a lot of ballot box stuffing. There's a lot of shenanigans. Election day came and went, no president. Tilden, the Democrat, needed 1 electoral vote. Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, needed all 4 states. A 15-person committee is put together to determine who the president's going to be. As you can tell from the map, 81.8% of the electorate voted. 81.8%. But South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida went for Rutherford B. Hayes. So it's like, wait a minute. Why are these southern states going to go for Hayes? It's called the corrupt bargain. Hayes promised these southern states that if you vote for me, my first act will be to withdraw troops from the South and end Reconstruction. That's exactly what happened. As a result of the corrupt bargain of 1877, Reconstruction ended. And what I put there to emphasize is that white supremacy meant more to Democrats than having a Republican president. It's one of the most impactful decisions in our history, and it was undemocratic. It was a result of fraud, intimidation, and ballot box stuffing, and murder. And it literally changed the direction that our nation was going. You can see Thomas Nast, the political cartoonist, symbolizing what the end of Reconstruction meant. It's pretty pressing, right? You've got the White League and the Klan shaking hands over a skull and crossbones, and the slogan is worse than slavery. All of these political advances that African Americans had utilized during Reconstruction are now gone. There's no protection. There's this period between the end of Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow. Because trust me, you know what's coming. White Democrats are back in control of their states, and Democrats are going to be put back in positions of authority. But as Democrats are put back in positions of authority throughout the South, they make a concerted effort to pass laws to limit the black vote. Now, they don't use the word race. But just because you don't use the term race doesn't mean that it's not meant to eliminate the black vote. Well, I didn't say that was racist. You don't have to. Right? So some of the restrictions. Man, I'm giving away all my good stuff. Let's start with poll taxes. This period between 1877 and 1899, so from the end of Reconstruction to the beginning of the 20th century, right? Yeah, it's the rise of Jim Crow. No doubt about it. It's not until the late 1880s and 1890s that Jim Crow laws are put on the books to keep blacks and whites separated in public accommodations. That doesn't have anything to do with the vote. The laws that were meant to restrict the black vote are being passed long before Jim Crow becomes a thing. And we see it with the passage of poll taxes. Now, poll taxes. The poll tax basically said that every voter who wanted to utilize their constitutional, federally guaranteed right to vote, they had to purchase a tax. They had to pay a tax. It was usually $2, but you could only purchase it in some states in 1 month. You had 1 month to pay your tax. Most of the time it was January, because that's when access to cash was its lowest, right? But you had to pay your poll tax, and then at the primary, you had to produce that receipt if you were brave enough to even try to. I mean, because keep in mind, you still have federal government's out of the picture, right? This is playing out in the South, but the fight against black voting rights is a national problem. The nation as a whole surrendered to white Reconstruction, not just the South. So poll taxes disqualified African Americans from utilizing their constitutional right to vote. Understanding and interpretation clauses are another thing that's applied. And later, these are put into constitutions, in state constitutions. That's why we know they exist. They are literally added to constitutions throughout the South. These understanding and literacy clauses basically meant that, number one, prospective voters, by the way, it's not racist, we're not saying black people. But for the white elected registrar, you had to demonstrate that you could read, number one. Or, as literacy rates increase, you had to demonstrate that you understood it. A section of the Constitution that you had to read. Now, if I had you interpret something for me, the interpretation is based on my understanding. So no matter how educated you are or aren't, you're not going to pass the interpretation clause. This is how bad it gets. Louisiana is the first state to do it. The grandfather clause. In 1893, Louisiana puts into their constitution that in order to be eligible to vote, the voter had to demonstrate proof that their grandfather was a registered voter in 1867. In order for for you to vote, you have to demonstrate your grandfather was a registered voter when only white people can register to vote. Louisiana just got lazy. Right? It's like, this is a way, we didn't, but it's not racist, we didn't mention race. As I keep saying that, keep in mind that all of these provisions are going to be upheld by courts and the Supreme Court. Williams versus Mississippi in 1898. Many of these clauses, the understanding and literacy clauses, the poll taxes, are challenged in the Supreme Court, a case that makes it to the Supreme Court in 1898. Now you may be thinking to yourself, this surely isn't constitutional. This is a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments, and you'd be right today. But in 1898, the Williams versus Mississippi, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that because race wasn't mentioned, it was constitutional. Our Supreme Court declared that every state had a right to disqualify groups of voters, as long as race and color weren't admitted. Why? The Supreme Court ruled that it's because, quote, the laws reach weak, vicious white men as well as weak, vicious black men. Look, one of the things that becomes a dishonest truth during the Civil Rights era is that black people during this period didn't register to vote with the rolls. To which, as a historian, I say, oh no. Look at what happens after Williams v. Mississippi. The lists are there. By 1900, black people are now being removed from voter rolls, like it never happened. Now you have the authority of the Supreme Court and state legislatures to take people off voter rolls, and southern states do. By 1900, every southern state had numerous laws to both restrict the black vote, and they're taking black people off the voter rolls. So you see people literally disappearing. Georgia and South Carolina, half of all registered voters between 1880 and 1888 are removed. They didn't want to register, they never registered. A lot. 130,000 African Americans registered to vote in 1896 in Louisiana. 8 years later, 1,300 are left. 129,000 are taken away. They never wanted to vote. A lot. The black vote in Mississippi by 1898 had been cut by 62%. And so forth and so on it goes. So that by the time we get to the Civil Rights era, one of the defenses that white Democrats make is that black people have the chance to vote. And look, they're not registered. They don't want to vote. A dishonest truth. I'm not going to go into this very deeply, but it's kind of in my research wheelhouse now, right? I'm writing a book about some of these topics. And it's during this time, between 1890 and 1910, that there's really a proliferation of Confederate monuments being put up throughout the South. If you grew up in the South like I did, and I know, surprise, I'm from Alabama. Right, Jake? It's just shocker, right? I can answer questions about that later, by the way. If you lived in the South, you drive through the South, you're going to see these Confederate monuments up everywhere. Gee, where are most of them located? Either public spaces or, even more ominously, courthouses. They are put in front of courthouses. Why? Because it's telling black people, we're in charge. Now, schools during the 1940s and 50s, we're going to name schools after Confederate leaders. Why? Grammar support. But that's another lecture for another day. Though image is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you can see where the Confederate monuments are being placed. It's to send a message. Politically speaking, you want to register to vote? Before you even enter the courthouse, you know whose game it is. One of the things that we often forget, and we can go into the Civil Rights Movement. I'm skipping a lot, right? But I want to bring back this idea of the black vote to the central understanding of the Civil Rights Movement. When we think of the Civil Rights Movement, and I'll lecture about the Civil Rights Movement, It's Brown versus Ward is where it begins. It's maybe World War II in veterans who fight the double V. We think about Rosa Parks' Montgomery bus boycott. A minister who in Montgomery was known as Michael King, who becomes Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And it is to fight for access to public spaces. It's about public discrimination. It's about Jim Crow. But it has always been a feature of the civil rights movement to fight for the right for black voter registration. Always. Particularly in more rural places like Mississippi. In Mississippi, public segregation didn't mean as much as the fact that a majority black population only had a single-digit registration number. So you've got organizations that canvass Mississippi to try to increase black voter registration. Some of these people end up dead. Schwerner, Cheney, Goodman, the infamous Mississippi burning case of 1964. The reason that Michael Schwerner, on the right, is targeted by the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi. He was put on a hit list because he was active in registering black voters. 3 people died because they are registering African Americans in Lowndes County, Mississippi. We have signs like this as organizations focus on the black vote. For me, this is one of the most powerful pictures that I use in my classes when we talk about black voting rights. You've got African American men who are literally taking their lives into their own hands. Fill out a voter registration questionnaire. And you've got 2 white people who look none too pleased about their presence, who are actually allowed to stand there and intimidate and watch them and read what they write down. Read the sign. Applications, these are the kinds of procedures that are put up in the South to prevent voter registration. Applications for registration, now that's just applications to register. Must be completely filled out without any assistance or suggestions from any person or memorandum. After 10 days, the applicant's name and addresses are published for 2 consecutive weeks in the newspaper. They cannot be ruled on until 14 days after the second publication. Therefore, it can take as long as 30 days before we can give you an answer. Here's your name and address for 10 days. Open season. If you don't withdraw your application within at the end of those 10 days, we're going to take 2 weeks to let you know. And that's before you even get a yes or no. If the vote wasn't important, why do people in positions of authority go to such measures to try to prevent people from exercising it? Because political power is transformative. Now let's see how you'll do. Let's see how you'll do on these tests. A little exercise. Pull some questions from the 1965 voter test question there. Yeah, some of the questions are yes, no. Some are which body, which organization presides over the collection of taxes at the federal level, right? You know, you've got some of those. One of the questions was, name the 3 forms of city government that the state of Alabama can constitutionally use. You know, stuff like that. So it's not a gimme, and you don't know if you pass or fail. It could be if you miss one question, you don't get to vote. You'll have to try again next year. If a person charged with treason, these are legitimate questions. If a person charged with treason denies his guilt, how many people must testify against him before he can be convicted? Okay, think a number. 2, you're correct. At what time of day on January 20th, every 4 years, does the term of the President of the United States end? What time? I would have thought 12:01 a.m. The president does not wish to sign a bill. How many days is he allowed in which to return it to Congress for reconsideration? 60 days? Yes. If a bill is passed by Congress and the president refuses to sign it and does not send it back to Congress in session within the specific period of time, is the bill defeated or does it become law? It becomes law, defeated. How about this one? It becomes law unless Congress adjourns before the expiration of 10 days. In what year did the Congress gain the right to prohibit the immigration of persons to states? Yeah, good luck with that one. 1808. Yeah. Voting test. Simple, right? No, it's not meant to be. In some states, before these tests were given out, questions were literally, how many angels can dance on a pinhead? And how many bubbles does the average bar of soap have? It doesn't matter, you're not voting. We come back to Selma, right? We forget about the importance of Selma, I think, sometimes. Birmingham campaign, important. St. Augustine campaign, important. But remember that what happens in Selma, the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, occurred because of a voting registration march. And a state trooper shoots a man in point-blank range in the head. SCLC, SNCC, CORE want to organize a march from Selma to Montgomery to protest the murder and to agitate for voting reform, for election reform. And we've got Bloody Sunday, March 6, 1965, in the bottom right. That photograph of John Lewis almost literally having his skull cracked, literally, over voting rights. We have the Selma to Montgomery March, one of the iconic photographs of the Civil Rights Movement. And we have people marching with vote. It's about the right to vote. Just like with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These civil rights organizations demanded a federal piece of legislation to guarantee the right to vote, and they did it. They did it. With the Voting Rights Act. Now, what does the Voting Rights Act do? I listed a few things there because it's really important. What does the 1965 Voting Rights Act do? One, it abolishes those tests. Educational requirements are tests or devices that are used to deny the right to vote because of race. The Civil Rights Act determined that all this is happening because of race. Because they're stating the obvious. Federal pre-clearance. This is a big one. Okay? What federal pre-clearance means is that now jurisdictions, counties usually, with a history of voter discrimination, like Neshoba County, Mississippi, like Jackson County, Florida, okay? They now, before they change their voting laws, they have to receive clearance from the federal government. In other words, you're not going to be trusted because you have a history of racism. So before you can change laws, you have to have pre-clearance from the federal government. This is huge. Because once again, it's the federal government saying, you can't do that because of your history. It stopped discriminatory laws before they took effect, and it remains one of the most powerful laws for the enforcement of civil rights in our nation's history. We'll talk about that in a minute. The nationwide prohibition of discrimination. No state or local government can impose procedures that result in race-based denial of the right to vote. Federal takeover of elections. Again, takeover is a strong word, but if you happen to show the county, Mississippi, where white people are using intimidation and terror to prevent black people from voting, then federal registrars are the ones that supervise those elections. Why? Because if they are violated, it is now a federal crime and not a state crime. The federal government is going back to Reconstruction. and saying the 14th and 15th Amendments have not been adhered to. Now we're doing it. This is why I tell students that the lie that we're a democratic society, that we're a democracy, did not become truth until 1965. Because of these reasons. We haven't been a true democracy living up to our constitutional promises since 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. And here's a big one. Language minority assistance. The Federal Civil Rights Act of 1965 requires election materials to be available in languages in certain areas, like, I don't know, South Florida, Texas, California. If there are places with high immigrant populations who have citizenship rights, localities have to provide it in their native language. We haven't had a national language. It was proposed at the Constitutional Convention to make English our national language, and it was rejected because it was declared to be, quote unquote, anti-democratic. In 2025, an executive order proclaimed that English would be our official language at the federal level. What does that mean? It means that this provision has now been thrown to the courts. There's a reason for chaos. There's a reason for things happening as they're happening. In advance of an election, the federal government no longer has to provide language assistance. Look, with the attack, well, with the passage of 65, we're now going to have open war on the Voting Rights Act. It happens with the Civil Rights Act, but for the purpose of this lecture, one of the things our nation's history demonstrates, and one of the reasons that these topics are to some people so controversial or uncomfortable. They're not uncomfortable or controversial, it's fact to me. But it doesn't demonstrate our nation is always progressing. What our nation demonstrates and what this lecture has demonstrated is that for every march toward an equal society, there's going to be a resistance. There's going to be blowback. To some people, equality looks like oppression. Always has. So, with the Voting Rights Act, we are going to have attacks on it. And we have ever since. Why? Well, let's start with states' rights. This idea that the federal government has no jurisdiction over the way a state conducts an election. This has worked over time. At first, it's soundly rejected, but states' rights is used as a reason to let states manage their own affairs. The farther we get away from these instances, the more convincing an argument like states' rights becomes. The big one, pre-clearance is in 2013. 2013, pre-clearance is ended. Right? I've talked about pre-clearance as being an important part of the Voting Rights Act. Why? Because if you have a history of doing this, you have to have federal permission before laws can be passed. No more. What happens with pre-clearance being removed? Now, redistricting plans without federal approval. Changes to polling locations without approval of the federal government. Voter ID laws at the state level without permission of the federal government. Early voting rules, registration procedures. What was intended to be with pre-clearance a preemptive strike against racially based decisions removed. Now we have decisions that have racial consequences. Period. For me, the undermining of democracy is one of the big things. I didn't talk about how with the Civil Rights Act we had a tremendous shift. We can talk about this later in Q&A. I don't want to go too long. The Voting Rights Act worked a lot like the 15th Amendment did. Right? With the Voting Rights Act's passage, you have black political participation increased dramatically. You have black representation increased dramatically. Right? And the numbers prove it. The Voting Rights Act is transformative. Okay? Not only that, but the Voting Rights Act is also going to have a consequence on national politics. Why? Because in order to effect change, black voters in the South now have to join the Democratic Party. They don't have to, but they do, because that's where the power resides. So what do white people in the South do? They begin to leave the Democratic Party. Right? Look, as early as 1968, 70% of Florida voters in 1968 voted for either Richard Nixon or George Wallace. That result was automatic almost. So this mass exodus of white Democrats out of that party into the Republican Party is a direct consequence of the '65 Civil Rights Act. But for me, one of the biggest attacks that the resistance to the Voting Rights Act has inspired is this movement to undermine democracy. That elections, because minorities are voting, because in cities there's fraud, because they are casting ballots illegally, it's the same type of rhetoric we heard during the Reconstruction era to justify questioning elections. The same rhetoric. Elections can't be trusted. Where are allegations of fraud being levied? In urban areas where people of color are the dominant voters. That's where it's happening. That's not surprising if you know the history. This idea of the election is rigged unless I win is straight from the Reconstruction era. Look at who's being charged and who's being accused, and look at the evidence that follows. We keep hearing about the 2020 election. Why? Because one party lost convincingly. And there have been 82 federal court cases that have produced no evidence of fraud. 82, at least, federal court cases in which no fraud has been demonstrated. Why is this happening? History. We're being dishonest about the reasons these allegations are being thrown. So, for some people, what is the problem? Why voting rights, undermining democracy, saying elections aren't secure, saying there's ballot box stuffing and immigrants are being flown in to vote? What does all of that lead us to? It leads us to January 6th. It leads us to a group of people who are convinced that they are saving their nation from being taken over, from electoral fraud, by political disingenuity. And I use these pictures because I think they say something that's very clear about the nature of where a lot of this antagonism comes from. It comes from white people who embrace a symbol that has been used to represent white supremacy. I'm not saying that everybody who flies that flag is a white supremacist, but I'm saying that the flag that they wave has been used as a symbol of white supremacy throughout history. Period. So the dishonest truth is that we're trying to save our nation. My question is always, save it from who? For who? Try to leave every lecture with a series of points, a series of importances, right? And I've listed them here. And y'all got to see inside how the sausage is made. But I think the points are important, right? The dishonest truth, the importance here is that the Reconstruction Amendments did change America into a multiracial democracy. And some people applaud that, but not all. Second point is that black people exercised the vote and faced extreme resistance, even lethal violence as a result. 3, the nation has allowed white supremacists to restrict voting rights. And that issue became a key component of the civil rights movement. It's not just about a hamburger and a coke. It's about the right to cast a ballot. slogan of the movement in some places was, quote, one man, one vote. Don't forget that. The Voting Rights Act, 1965, did more to protect equal citizenship rights than even the Civil Rights Act did, arguably. And consequently, it has been attacked because of it ever since. Finally, number 5, and this is why I didn't want y'all to see my notes because I think the power of the ballot, as exercised by all Americans, particularly minorities, remains the target of an insecure, frightening majority. As you can see, the thought that I wanted to leave you with, because it's in all caps. Democracy is not a given. One of the things that bothers me is when I hear people say, our institutions will persevere. That's a concept called American exceptionalism that I don't quite buy. Democracy is not a given. The right to vote is never guaranteed. We must fight to preserve it for all people equally. If we love this country as much as we proclaim that we do, then we protect all of our constitutional amendments equally, not just one or the second. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I think now's the time where I get to join JD on stage. Uh-oh, the grilling.
Wow. So my head was spinning the whole lecture because, for good reasons, mainly because you touched on some things that some people may have thought about but never asked, and you revealed it to them so clearly. It was superbly done. I can't thank you enough for that, Michael. But so while you were talking, I noticed some people, taking notes or whatever. I was trying to take notes, to be truthful with you, and my son hollered at me and said, why am I on my phone doing that? I thought I was being, up to date and everything, not using paper and pencil, but evidently it wasn't a good photo op for me on my phone while I was doing that. But anyway, so I don't know if anyone has a question, but I do have a question to start it off. If you have a question, just please raise your hand and I will get to you. The Voting Rights Act is so very important. Why was it just an act and not law?
Good question. Because with legislation, it did go through Congress before it was signed into law. So the process was, it had to go through the House, it went through the Senate. When it gets to LBJ's desk, his signature made it law. Okay, so the act does become law. It is the process. Now, what I will say is that there was passionate debate in Congress. There was never any indication, or it was never preordained that it would actually make it through the Senate. Now, what the argument can be is that why do we need an act when it's in the Constitution, and the act gives the amendment teeth? The act is the enforcement of the constitutional provision. Okay? So, if I get what you're saying, why do we need that in the process of governance? And you need the federal act to give detail on how the amendment is going to be enforced, if that makes sense.
So it doesn't have to keep being
relitigated and renewed and reinterpreted. Right. The act is the act. Now it is the act in and of itself. And that's why you see provisions, particularly the early clearance part, that is targeted by the Senate. In 2013, that pre-permission clearance, that was literally celebrated by Republicans. Literally celebrated, because they basically said, we weakened the Voting Rights Act. We've done it. The pre-clearance now is over, and states can get back to it. So, yeah, the impetus becomes the act itself, and not necessarily the constitutional amendment. Because to repeal the constitutional amendment, you're going to need another amendment, and that's the chances of that happening are 0 to rare. So, yeah, that's the process that's at stake here.
Wow. No, I have questions. I told you my head was spinning when you're talking. I'm like, I would have had more on my phone if
I've learned the hard way there too. I've actually called out a student before for doing that. I'm like, why are you on your phone? And he's like, I'm sorry, I left my pen. And I'm like, okay.
So I can be up to date and not use Metro paper. I'm sorry.
I worked in retail about 30 years ago. I was a manager at a video concept store, and they had a loss prevention thing where if we saw something suspicious, we called 2 stores, and they called 2 stores, and like the firebrand, within 10 minutes, every store was on the lookout for that. Now, what happened in 2020 with COVID, there was some kind of rumor going around that certain places would have mask mandatory requirements, and we didn't know where they were, but we had a place and a way to call, so 2 people called 2 people, and St. Lucie County figured it out within an hour of the beginning of the election in Martin County. And I went down to Martin County, and in predominantly low-income neighborhoods, they had them where there was a school or a nursery, and they would have, you have to wear a mask to come in and vote or go home and get a mask. But those things were, I didn't know where they were going on. So I took the sign down at a risk of getting in trouble, because I'd rather take a risk of getting in trouble and have that sign, because other places I went to did not have you must wear a mask sign. So this was like, and then sure enough, in certain neighborhoods, those signs were there and they were taken down by 11 o'clock in the morning. So there needs to be some type of system where you have one person that suddenly something seems right, you better call 2 people, and then whoever's the lookout person or the poll watcher, to get it early, at the beginning of the election, because there's going to be a lot of stuff, and who knows what it's going to be.
That is something that bothers me for the midterms that are coming up. Is that the weakening of systems so that it's almost case by case at the local level. That's intentional. That's intentional. You're right. I mean, it's.
Talk a little bit more. My understanding about the pre-clearance clause is that it was directed at specific states, and southern states in particular, and that when the pre-clearance clause was gutted, it opened up room for states all over the country to start enacting pretty vicious, these laws like you can't have food or water or sit down.
Yep.
Stacey Abrams had a fabulous video about comparing pre-clearance clause and what's happened since then. I just wonder if you can address some of the voter suppression that has been going on since the pre-clearance was destroyed.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. It was in Georgia. It's against the law to bring people who were in line food or water, right? And it's, you could not do that before pre-clearance was taken away, because it was obviously intended to hit voters of a certain race, color, in certain districts. Same thing with redistricting. I had someone point out, well, redistricting has always been, redlining has always been a political fact in the United States, and it has been, but the frequency and the location with which redlining targets impoverished communities has increased since 2013, and that's undeniable. Some of the other voter ID, the forms of identification that count toward voter registrations, that shifts. If you move from one county to another, those requirements are gonna be different, and you're not always required to be told up front. So, it's almost like playing whack-a-mole with voter restrictions, right? It's where you are locally, the county is going to determine, based on state initiatives, what you can and can't do. And that's I think part of the pre-clearance is meant to sow confusion. And it's worked. It's worked.
That happened in 2013. There was a great American president at that time named Barack Obama. How in the hell did that happen?
For me, I think that was a precursor to Obama. I think what has happened since, though, has accelerated because we have black presidents. I think that the foundation for those restrictions were put into place, and when Obama was elected, it accelerated the paranoia. I mean, to your point, I remember I was watching January 6th happen in real time, and one of the thoughts that I've had, and I've shared this before, is all of this has happened because we elected a black man president. Period. I mean, that's the origin of the new executive, right? It was the birther movement. The birther movement was in direct response to that election. So, you know, you can look at, with any event in history, you can look at it as the culmination, and I think too many people did. Barack Obama's elected, we've arrived. We're a biracial society. Or you can look at it as the beginning. A beginning of backlash against that. Right? Just like the death of Lincoln. Is it the end of something, or is it the beginning of something? I think the election of Obama was both the culmination of something, but it was the culmination of something that a lot of people hated. Because as a result, you have the Tea Party movement, you have the birther movement, you have these, in my opinion, anti-democratic forces that are going to do whatever they can, once again, to take us back to a period that should not have ever been a part of our history.
My question is simple. What can we do as Americans to get rid of this regime? Vote, stay vigilant, and fight the good fight.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that history teaches us is that, I took a picture of the quote, you know, strong people do something, weak people accept their fates, right?
The strong do what they want,
can,
and the weak do suffer what they must.
What they must, you know, and it's one of the things we learned from particularly black history in this country is that education has always been a form of resistance, right? You can't always expect your public school teachers or your teachers in universities to tell you what you need to do. You have to seek out solutions in places like this, in forums like this, which is why I'm always willing to speak in places like this and to travel, right? It's because we are at a crisis, and it's a crisis. People say it's an unprecedented crisis. When I think back to Reconstruction and 150 people being slaughtered in the county, we're not quite there yet, but we're not far from it. I mean, when you have people who no longer feel that they need to conceal their identities to carry out acts of racial terrorism, that they can actually proclaim it with the merch they wear, we don't need the Ku Klux Klan when we got the Proud Boys, right? We just don't. So we're not far from being there, and there's nothing in this nation's history that says we won't end up there again, right? So yes, it is, education is a form of resistance. And when I say do your research, I don't mean it in the find the facts that fit your narrative and use those. I mean, when you're told something, question its validity, particularly from the source from which it comes. I don't trust people who've demonstrated themselves unworthy of trust. And I'm not going to let somebody tell me I'm wrong when this is what I do for a living. Right? I study these topics. I never stop. So when I have the chance to share the history of these topics and what the stakes are for us moving forward and for our kids and our grandkids, I'm going to take the opportunity to say, we can't sit on the sidelines or we will lose it. Because it happened during Reconstruction and afterward. So yes, if the vote didn't matter, people would not have killed for your right to use it, or died for your right to use it, period. For me, it's, you know, this is a highfalutin, you know, Yale type thing. But the Voltaire quote, the mind once enlightened can't go back again to darkness. Now that you know this stuff, what are you gonna do about it? That's why I tell students, you wanna sit out an election when you know people have died? I can't. I would feel professionally unethical to know what I know and to teach what I teach and not vote. So yes, every vote matters. If not, people would not have got killed to prevent those from using it, period. And the thing in this society that's really bothering me, the climate, is we can have opinions, but we can't choose our own facts. Right? We can have opinions, but if you hear some of the rhetoric coming out of DC, it's I believe, I think, I feel. I don't care about what you think, believe, or feel. I want to see evidence. Right? Show me evidence. Not beliefs, facts, and feelings. I have beliefs, facts, and feelings. So, yeah, that's my soapbox.
Can I just interject? So, yeah, because the vote is so important and people realize it, they're looking at the Electoral College and how they can manipulate in their favor, changing redistricting, gerrymandering, or whatever. What is your view, real quick, on should we stay with the Electoral College or should we go with the popular vote?
Popular vote. The Electoral College is out of date.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Electoral College is out of date. It was put into effect for a specific reason, at a specific time, at a time when you had to be a property-owning white man to vote. That has changed. That has changed dramatically. So yes, it needs to be a popular vote. For a variety of reasons, many of which that are related to this topic. So yeah, but you'll notice how, in the national rhetoric, the Electoral College argument, we need to get rid of the Electoral College, it seems to only rise up when one political party loses. It's very similar to the, if I lose, the election's rigged, but if I win, it worked. Right? It's where do these arguments come from and when? It's inconsistent. The Electoral College is outdated for a variety of reasons. But there's not going to be a movement to replace it until a party in power loses and can do something about it in Congress. So, yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
How do you think, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, when it comes up before the Supreme Court, how do you think they will Section 2 is electing that if they don't move in favor?
When I look at the Supreme Court, I'm not optimistic at all. I've been surprised with a couple of recent decisions. Pleasantly surprised, actually. But, I mean, this court has been built to lean hard right. It's been built to. And I think one of Barack Obama's biggest shortcomings was the merit card debacle. I think rolling over and not fighting more on that is guaranteed that the Supreme Court's in the shape that it's in now. It's to be determined. Maybe I'm being a little too critical because with the tariff issue, the thing that was unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented, is that we have never seen a sitting president go after personally the Supreme Court justices that didn't vote in their favor. He went after them personally. Their families should be ashamed. They should be embarrassed. Historically, that is unprecedented. And that's the stuff of totalitarians, by the way. That's undermining our system of checks and balances. Now, I say that to say, when the Voting Rights Act comes, will that impact the Supreme Court? I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I hope that it won't, but we know one thing, Clarence Thomas is gonna vote against it. We know that. Because he's basically said dismantling the welfare state is his primary goal. That's why he wanted to be on the Supreme Court, because he hated liberals. Direct quote. So, yeah, we know one that's not gonna go with the more progressive interpretation of the Constitution.
Thank you for your think, goes back to the 13th Amendment, and while there are many great parts of it, there's also convict leasing. In many states, and it is changing, formally incarcerated people can't vote. I'm wondering if the convict leasing was an opportunistic happenstance that impacted voting, or was it intentional?
I believe that it's intentional. Look, here's the other thing that happened. In Florida, we voted by 60+%. In Florida, we can't agree 60% on anything, right? But we agreed that people who convicted of felonies should have restitution. Their vote should be restored. Well, what happened? The legislature said, we're gonna ignore the will of the people, which is an anti-democratic move, by the way, to say they have to pay the state back for all costs incurred in order to get their right. That's not what I voted on, right? So, convict leasing, I think that it reflected Congress at the time, because Congress has always had a problem with distinguishing between property rights and human rights. And this idea that people cause property damage means that they should have to compensate the state, even if it means they're leased out. But I think it was used. So, intentionality is where I go. And it's still in the Constitution. So the idea that people in places like Parchman Farm have to work for 30 cents a day is something that is constitutional. So it absolutely is.
And it has resulted in mass incarceration, where hundreds of thousands of predominantly black men cannot vote.
Right. And it, like I said, even in states where we reverse it, the executives and the legislature in charge have determined that there will be conditions added to that, which undermines the will of the popular vote. Yeah, all we can do is vote these people out. That's all. And it feels helpless, but conservatives have been playing the long game. And we have to realize that justice isn't always instant. It takes time. And it takes patience. And that's not right. That's our system.
In our country, money is power. And when I think about the history of the 13th, 14th, 15th, and even 19th amendments, in the creation of the amendments, was there ever a view given to reparations for the massive wrong that was done?
No. It was, reparations was a concept that some of the most determined abolitionists had, but we couldn't even consider land redistribution, right? Look, for me, the biggest failure of Reconstruction, other than the fact that troops were pulled out and it was surrendered, is the fact that the 40 acres and a mule idea, this idea that property owners, Confederates, people who committed treason. They committed treason. Property leaves a traitor. Okay? I mean, it's a fact. They broke their oath to the United States to fight for a foreign government. Okay? The punishment for treason then was the same as it is now. But this land-owning class, the politicians, the military leaders, they got to keep their property. Because even Republicans in Congress during this time would not take the step of saying, well, it's anti-American to confiscate property. So we couldn't even do the basic minimum of punishing this class that led us into 700,000 dead Americans. And the basis of that wealth, giving it to the people who actually made that wealth. Right? The 40 acres and a mule idea comes from Field Order number 15, Williams Country Sherman, in the Sea Islands from St. Augustine, basically all the way up through northern South Carolina into southern North Carolina. Right? The 40 acres and a mule idea was working. Black people were farming. They were cultivating. There was an economic basis where they could finally make a life for themselves. That land was taken away. So not only do we not have reparations ever being considered, but we have land that was redistributed, that was actually taken away from the people who were making a separate life, an economically viable life, autonomous life for themselves. So, for me, the biggest failure of Reconstruction, other than its ultimate abandonment, is the failure of land redistribution. Because just like with political rights, if you can't exercise a vote, if you can vote and you still depend on someone for your economic well-being, how are you going to vote? The way they want you to. So no, and look, I'll get on my soapbox again. This idea, this often comes up, reparations for black people. No. We've given reparations in this country for so many different things over time. Oh, reparations is a very American concept. We've done it. Oftentimes, reparations are to property owners who lose property. But when it comes for people who had nothing and had it taken from them, or their labor was exploited, or their land was taken, we have reparations for Native Americans. We haven't had it for Africans. So this idea that reparations is un-American is actually a symptom of historical ignorance. That's the honest truth, right?
With the attempts of the federal government to influence policy and teaching at the colleges and the book bans in Florida, how do you teach?
That's a great question. We had this. She asked me before, and I said, ask me in Q&A if you do that. God, I hate to sound like a jerk, but really. I've had an episode where I was asked to teach a group of teachers. It was for a seminar on the civil rights movement. It was in Osceola County. It was sponsored by a national group, the National Council for History Education, and it came just days after the Stop Road Act was signed here in Florida. And because of the title, the long civil rights movement, the school board said that it's critical race theory. They canceled it. Didn't contact me. It was because the topic was the civil rights movement. It was canceled. Because of concerns with critical race theory. There has been an effort, and I think I told you before, that when the idea of fake news was first used during the first administration, I told my students fake history is going to be news. Because we're attacking institutions that have held the powerful accountable. And education is meant to educate in order to ask good questions, to think critically, to analyze evidence. So that's going to come under attack. It's not called fake history, it's called critical race theory. It's called anti-woke. It's called DEI. And in the public schools, there have been movements and efforts to prevent the teaching of some of these classes. When I have a colleague, a historian who's at a university not far from here, before they can access their Canvas page, their online learning module, they actually have to check a box saying that none of their materials are politically insensitive or force an ideology. And what does that mean? Right? So that's happening in the state schools. This idea that schools are overrun by leftists and we have to have ideological balance. So we're going to have these conservative institutes at the University of Florida, the Hamilton Institute for classical learning and whatnot. It's all dog whistles. I'm at a private institution, so I'm teaching a class this semester on Reconstruction in Jim Crow America. I have taught courses on the civil rights movement in Florida, the modern black freedom struggle.
What's the private institution you teach?
Flagler College.
Oh.
Okay. But we're only as open as our board of trustees allows. There has been pushback. You won't find anything that I do, I'll put it to you like this, you won't find any of the things that I do on our college's social media page. They won't cover it. Period. And the rationale is because we don't want to bring attention from Tallahassee to what we're doing. Even though we're private, we still get state funds. So there is this fine line that we walk to where even at a private institution, the president can say, we value academic freedom. But if we've got a $25 million grant for historic preservation that we need to get from Tallahassee, why stick our head out of the foxhole while we're told when the bullets are falling? So I've said all that to say that there is an assault on education, particularly history education in Florida, that's hitting our public schools consciously and our private schools much more subtly. And I also understand, I mean, I'm no martyr, I'm no hero. Like I said, if I know this history and don't talk about it, that's professional malpractice as far as I'm concerned. Especially being a white guy from Alabama with this accent. Right? Who am I to not tell stories about people who sacrificed a hell of a lot more than I have? So I'm fully aware that it can change. The other thing that's happened, I was telling JD this before the program began. 18 months ago, not even 18 months ago. Yeah, about 18 months ago, I gave a lecture in Port Orange. And for the first time, I had somebody who was so upset by the content. The content was a lecture on the Ku Klux Klan for what? And he was so offended by telling me that I brought politics into the history lecture that the police had to call it and have him escorted out. Yeah, but it's a history lecture. I'm like, this is a history lecture. And you're threatening people? And literally, I'm watching his hands because I'm like, if they go into his pocket. So, but this is the kind of behavior that's been enabled because this gentleman, and I use the term lightly, told me that my president gave me a mandate to call out your bullshit. That's an exact quote. So that's where we are, right? Again, that doesn't make me a martyr or hero or anything else. It's just, that's the state of things today. It's people are upset by truth that doesn't fit their political narrative. And that's a them problem, not a me problem.
I just wanted to interject real quick that the room is up at 3 o'clock, and so we can make our questions real quick and responses quick. And we still have a couple more things to tidy up before we get out of here.
Let's see what we're going to come in here after this. How are y'all getting down in there?
Of course, JD had to say that as a microphone because he knows that I can be quick.
Oh, no.
Just actually a couple of comments. One is, do you think that the idea of reparations or the divide in reparations really goes back to the same concept of whether it be unity or justice?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Reparations representing justice.
Justice. And there's also this fear. When you study the literature during this period, there is this fear in the federal government, even amongst Republican allies. There's this fear of, we're going to make these people, quote unquote, dependent. Right? If we give them something, they are not going to produce on their own. They're going to become dependent on the government. Right? They're not going to farm. They're not going to become educated. So they're doing everything except calling black women welfare workers. But it's the same concept of, well, we want to do what's right. We want to make sure that they can eat, but we also want to make sure that to get food, they have to work for it. And so this idea of creating dependency is a throwback to the idea that black people are inferior and they'll look to us for a handout and not try to earn it themselves. So that's a continuum. That's a great question. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't have a real conversation about reparations for the legacies of the slave.
The other comment I had going to the school boards and the books and so forth, I have to call out or shout out to Virginia, who just passed a law stating that they have to teach the truth about January 6th. It's something that I just recently read about, and I think it also goes back to your idea of the fact that the elected officials at the sheriff's level, or the school board level, and so forth, those really make a difference. And I think that are involved at those levels are where we can try to make a change.
I echo that. One of the things that history demonstrates is that the local elections were more consequential for us than presidential elections. So I absolutely echo that, 100%.
Anyone, real quick? Anyone?
Just one last question. Good.
Just, not just civil rights history, I've been impressed the last couple of years at our local high school here, in Baltimore here, they have an Anne Frank exhibit, we have middle school and high school students, especially they train honor students to repeat those things, and they do a wonderful job. But I'm always impressed the last couple of years, where these, 12, 13-year-old kids are putting two and together, hey, the rise of Nazism sounds familiar, right? And so I'm wondering if other kinds of history are also under attack and need to be defended.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that is considered to not be quote unquote patriotic history is being attacked. Now, for me, my comeback to that is that there's no more patriotic history than understanding African American history, period. Because of all the people who, look, black people are the only people brought here to serve, period. By and large. If there is any group that should not embrace the quote unquote American dream of constitutional rights that our government has guaranteed, it should be African Americans based on their experience. The fact that they haven't and have accepted and just demanded equal treatment under the Constitution as citizens is a very patriotic education, and have used the system to hold the system accountable. Okay? So, yes, there are many forms of history that if they don't sort of proclaim this idea of America as the best and getting better every episode, it is questioned as unpatriotic. But, the thing that I've learned is that our students can handle truth. As their parents can. I mean, seriously, our students can handle truth. When I give them evidence, I rarely get pushed back in the classroom. Rarely. And if I do, I'm like, hey, bring the evidence. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. But I'm not trying to indoctrinate. I'm trying to educate. I'm not in the conversion. I am in the education business, right? And one of the biggest myths that the devil ever told is that college professors have all this influence to indoctrinate and change people's minds. I can barely get my students to do the damn reading. So I wish I was as powerful as some of these politicians make me out to be. But yeah, it is the fact that you bring fact, that you bring evidence, that you bring analysis and critical thinking means that people are going to start asking hard questions, and that's exactly what some politicians don't want from the next generation.
But also, to your point, when we talk about other groups that are being marginalized now, I do want people to understand that the SAVE Act is also attacking women voters.
That's exactly right.
Because the party in power has seen the shift in women vote, and so they're going right straight after that.
One last question. This is what, and I don't even need the microphone, but this is important about our Mason history. I came down here in 1967 for a year. My father was involved in trying to help get migrant workers into the public school system, but we were kind of chased out in 1968. But there was a local black newspaper called, I believe it was the Manchester, on the Treasure Coast. And it's disappeared. I don't know what happened to it, but it was in the 60s and 70s. And people would keep it in their garages, and I'd say, why not take it down to the Historical Society? They'd say, no, it'll disappear. And then when the storms came, it got destroyed. But there's that history. If those things aren't on microfiche, somebody needs to round them up and put them on microfiche. There's a lot of stuff happened here in the late 60s and 70s that are disappearing. And somebody needs to track that down.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So real quick, just a little shopkeeping here. We did not charge for this. This is free, but we do ask for donations, just to help freight the costs.
You have to pay to leave.
That's an old Baptist thing, you know. You didn't pay to get in, but you will pay to get out. But yes, we are asking for donations. If you have cash, we will take it. If not, we try to make it simple for you. If you have a QR code right here, you can put your phone up to the QR code and you can donate there. And and so. One more bit of housekeeping. We have, talking about voting rights and everything, we're pleased to have with us also Krista Story, who is president of the Port St. Lucie Democrat Women's Club. And I thought that she would be able to come and just to give us a brief, if anything else, of what's going on that we may need to know about as far as registering, as far as mail-in ballots, as far as anything that has to do with voting in this county, in Indian River, or Port St. Lucie, or in Martin County. Kristen, come.
There you go.
Like 2 seconds, right? We have to get out.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. So, the other thing, kind of the other hat, and this is how I met JD months ago, a couple of years ago, was participating in voter protection. And I heard from those of you that are kind of concerned about what may happen in the midterm, all the counties have poll watchers, canvassing board observers, all those kind of things. It comes through your political party, but that is an excellent place to, and I'm happy to share information. But so, anyway, what I would urge us here in Florida, someone mentioned the SAVE Act, but there's also something going on at the state level. The Florida House has already passed a bill, House 991, and it's touted as, cleaning stuff up, and it's not quite as aggressive as the SAVE Act, but it's attempted to link driver's license information and also maybe require additional documents or not, et cetera, I'm paraphrasing. But as of today, the Florida Senate has not passed that, but is expected to do so because, they're just trying to keep illegals and et cetera from voting, although I think a few years ago, our governor touted the safety and security in Florida elections, but every year since then, they've added more things. So one thing you can do, contact, we just gotta speak up, even though it's probably gonna happen. But one thing I would say to people, if you know anybody that's going to register to vote, is thinking about registering to vote, they need to do it potentially before July 1st. The House bill, I believe, says July 1st, this will go into place. The Senate version, maybe not till January, but I want to address that. And also, if anybody needs to make any changes to anything related to your voter registration, if you've moved, if you need to update any blessed thing, I would urge you to do it before July 1st, and no matter where you are. So pay attention to that. And, that's still, some of the details are still coming forward on that. But the other thing is that in case if you vote by mail in the state of Florida right now, we still can vote by mail, but who knows what's going to happen with that. But if you have to renew your request to vote by mail every 2 years. If you haven't done it recently, you should, and you want to vote by mail, you should check and make sure. You can reach out to your local supervisor of elections by phone or email. Most of them are very accommodating. So, but if you want to vote by mail, you need to take care of that. Again, I do this by July 1st because we're not sure what's going to happen. And anyway, and the other thing is updating, making sure, many of us in this room have kind of grayish hair. And your signature may have changed over time, and that's also another thing. That, as you know, when you step up to vote, you do have to sign. and it's kind of difficult anyway, but because of the fact that the poll workers, those are the people that are paid, those are the people sitting at the desks, are the ones that make that initial determination if your signature matches. You might want to make sure that your signature is going to match and nobody's going to question it. And again, through your supervisor of elections office, going in, and you may need to do that in person, but you do not want somebody to question your signature come the midterms, because there are people from both parties sitting as poll workers. They should be not partisan, but I'll just say to you that, you might want to exercise caution to make sure there's no issues with your signature matching. So, then as you said, what can you do? So, I am president of the Democratic Women's Club in St. Lucie County, but I participate at the Democratic Party in St. Lucie County. We have and same thing up here, all around. Your local Democratic Party has many options for participating. Phone calls, door knocking, writing checks, raising a ruckus, reaching out to legislators. Last thing I'm going to say is one of the worst proponents of some of the worst bills that deal with trying to take away people's human and civil rights in Florida this session is our very own Senator Erin Roth. Her name is affiliated with this change in the election law and some other things, and I'm just,
Erin Ross is her name?
Erin Roth. She represents most of St. Lucie County, a good bit of Indian River County. She's a lawyer, if I'm stepping over. She's a lawyer, but I think there's a different constitution that, I'm also a lawyer, that she said she would uphold, than the one that I had to swear to when I got admitted to the
Isn't
bar.
the driver's license star compliant? We had, after 9/11, we had to show star compliance.
Well, and some of that, the legislation is still being tweaked in Florida. And then, we have to worry about what's going on at the national level. So we've got to pay attention. And so some of what's approved documentation that you're a U.S. citizen, may change. You need to make sure you just need to pay attention, reach out to your local supervisor, and make sure all your ducks are in a row, no matter what. And anyway, I would get anything done before July 1st, just to be on the safe side, and then get involved.
Okay. Thank you so much, Krista. Thank you. Hold sit for 45 more seconds. And we have 45 seconds. Yes.
Sorry. Hold on. Sorry about that. Let's play that one more time.
Not so much deception as it is you're only being. And if you don't know the whole truth,
You want to know the whole?
exactly. You want to know, you need to know the whole truth. And now it's incumbent on us to go search what happened. How did we get here? Well, if you've been paying attention, if you've been doing your own work of digging for the truth of the news, you would know how we got there. And it's important for people to speak up and speak out and protest, but they also have to know the whole truth of the news. You can't just go out there and because the truth deserves your whole attention. I'm Dana King, personal opinion used to live in the news on the opinion page. Now, opinion and its evil cousins, misinformation and bias, are part of the news. How do I know? 25 years as a major market journalist. Come on out April 4th, and we can talk about how we got here.
Yes.
Same room, April 4th.
Yes. Prayerfully, yes. 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 And if you have a chance, Dana King is with us. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you so much for coming up, and we'll see you later. You're welcome.
Thanks.
Okay. Go back the other way. All right. Okay. I know. You ain't saying nothing,
I've actually come out with
Not
Drag out my birth certificate. So my ID for years. I'm gonna write some number down. I'm gonna text it.
Oh, yes, sir.
Good, man. You guys do this thing, man. I'll be
And if you walk toward the main road, that's
Yes.
Here's what's gonna happen.
I would have had to rent the room for an hour, you know.
My wife was laughing. Never been like that.
Why would it be for the people that have to be put together? He did it from the United States, the bills, the laws that were passed here at the from that. Tell you about the lies and dishonesty, misinformation, Oh, that was crazy. It was, first of all, we had nowhere to walk. All the road, and then did the house. It was this side. So Mary, I'm like, Mary, watch traffic. The addresses. I realized that I started in we were in
Across the board, yeah, that's an evergreen state. But you can't change the thing. Oh, you do?
I was like a question, right?
Yes, sir.
You know, I said, first of all, it was really good. It was when I say awesome, my father has these awards and that. And I know he was right. You know, of course I'm going to what would you say? To, Dave, you know, I would look at how I look at it.
Look, you know what, if anybody would have had that, we would have had a house, but probably I tried to, because it's so tiny, it would have to be. You know, and I was talking to the day, and they were like, they were having, you know, I'm just, oh, it had to be one of these one that did, you know, right before, 2/3 House, 2/3 Senate, and a popular vote. We would have to have a super majority in both. Which is, it would have to be a super majority in the House and Senate, and then you amend the Constitution to go to the states for a vote. So every state would have to vote on it. But I think if it made it to the states, that would, it would pass. But it would take a lot to get it to the states. So yeah, it would have to. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Oh, nice. I can find out if you're over there. Yeah, well, you know, my, it was just as much. Oh, my God. It was awesome. Got a little work. We came up with unique place. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no. Right now, undergraduate enrollment is probably harder to choose. Oh, wow. Hey, whatever it takes. So I'd be working on that pole vault too if I was 14. So.
I tell people all the time.
So we got 50 chairs.
She signed it and then we'll
Well, you know that.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, you know,